Now let's step through a live example of how a convolutional neural network actually processes an image. So we'll use this fantastic tool called the CNN Explainer, which simulates a forward pass through a simple image classifier. So take a look at the input image here on the left. So this is a colored image of a coffee mug, and since it's a colored image, we are actually will actually process this image as three channels: the red, green, and blue, right? So you can notice that the input layer will preserve its two-dimensional structure, right? So notice how it's a grid and we did not flatten the vector, right? So this is what allows the CNN to process visual features spatially, okay? So as we step into the first convolutional layer, you can observe how the filters extract simple patterns, right? So things like the edges, the corners, these filters are small, so they're usually 3 by 3 or 5 by 5, and you're sliding over the image, right? So you are activating um, these filters in response to local features. Okay, so you can think of this as the model learning to recognize strokes or outlines. Okay, so after that, we move to a reload activation. Just like we've said before, it only allows a positive signal to pass. And then from there, move into the second convolutional layer. We now see combinations of those earlier features being activated. Okay, so this is the beginning of a hierarchical learning pattern. So the edges are combined into textures or small shapes. Okay, and then as we go deeper into through another convolutional layer, right? So you can see that we're continuing to do the same operation across convolutional layers, right? And then at the end, so this is the max pooling operation. So, and then at the end, we move to the fully connected or the dense layer. Okay, so here the network have moved from local to global understanding. Okay, and then this final dense layer doesn't operate on pixels anymore. Okay, so here it works with abstracted features that might represent parts of a digit, for example, if we are doing digit recognition, or its overall shape. Okay, so the output layer then uses these high-level features to make its prediction. Okay, and you can see here that we have, after the vector had been flattened, um, we have that simple operation that we've talked about before, which is the activation and then the calculation of the logits, which is those raw scores as an output of each one of these neurons. And then the logits pass through the softmax activation function, which it will eventually decide that this corresponds to an espresso image. Okay. So what's powerful here is that these filters are learned automatically during training, right? So the network figures it out. So as we explained before, through gradient descent. Okay. So this layered feature learning is what makes CNNs very effective for images, right? So instead of us extracting the features manually, or for instance, designing an edge detector, the network constructs its own, let's say, toolkit by seeing enough labeled um, examples. So let's take a closer look at what makes convolutional neural networks not just effective, but also scalable, especially when compared to dense, fully connected architectures. So there's two fundamental ideas which enable this. The first is receptive fields, and the second is the parameter sharing idea. So for the first one, in a CNN, each neuron in a convolutional layer is not connected to every pixel in the input image. So instead, it's connected only to a small region, right? a local sliding window, as we've seen in the last lecture, typically a 3 by 3 or a 5 by 5. So this means each neuron sees only a small part of the input. We call this region the neuron's receptive field. Now, here's where things get really interesting. So as you stack more convolutional and pooling layers, the effective receptive field increases. So deeper neurons start to see larger and more abstract regions of the original input. So for example, in the first layer, a neuron might detect a vertical edge, and by the third or fourth layer, neurons might detect texture or object parts or the entire structure, like a sleeve um, or a shoe sole, right? So the next idea is the parameter sharing. So unlike dense layers where each input neuron connects with its own unique weight to each output neuron, with convolutional layers, they reuse the same filter weights across all spatial positions. So this shared filter slides over the input, as we've seen, and it performs the same operation at each location. So the benefit is huge. So instead of learning hundreds of thousands of individual weights, the model only needs to learn a small set of filter parameters, maybe just 9 values for 3 by 3 kernels, right? So this design reduces the number of parameters, which lowers the memory requirement and speeds up training and reduces overfitting. And it also gives CNNs an important property, which is if a feature like an edge or a corner moves within the image, the CNN still detects it using the same filter, right? So this is very important in vision tasks where object position should not affect classification, right? So say it is translation invariant. So whatever the position, it doesn't really affect the outcome. So together these two concepts, which is the receptive field and the parameter sharing, allow CNNs to scale to large images and also learn hierarchical features, right? So up to this point, we've used dense neural networks where every neuron in one layer connects to every neuron in the next, right? And so in the example you will see in the lab, the input, whether it's 2 features, right, or 784 pixels, it actually gets fully flattened and processed as one dimension vector at the end, right? So this approach is versatile and works well for tabular or structured data, right? But it comes with 2 major limitations for imaging inputs. So first, dense layers lose spatial structure. So when you flatten a 28 by 28 image into a 784 values, we remove all information about pixel proximity or layout, right? Essentially, you're throwing away patterns like edges and shapes, right? And then second, dense networks are very expensive in terms of the number of parameters, right? A small hidden layer connected to 784 inputs might still require tens of thousands of weights, right? So now with CNNs, we retrain the spatial dimensions of the input and process the image. So we do retain that spatial dimension. We don't flatten it. Just like with the dense architecture, and we are processing the image in local patches. Okay, using those small learnable filters. So these filters slide over the image, as we said, and they apply the same weights at every location. Okay. So here we introduce another performance evaluation metric. So other than the accuracy score, which we have been using so far, we can talk about confusion matrices. So a confusion matrix provides a multi-dimensional view of classifier performance, right? Especially important in multi-class problems like the fashion MNIST, which we'll discover in the lab. So it shows not only the correct predictions along the diagonal right here, but also the specific classes that were misclassified, which are the values of the diagonal, right? So unlike when we have one scalar score, which is the accuracy, the confusion matrix actually allows us to distinguish between systematic errors that the model makes and just random misclassifications. So if we have, for instance, a consistent confusion between two classes, the pullover and coat, this may suggest that the model is extracting insufficiently discriminative features, or maybe the data self itself has some visual ambiguities, okay? So here, the confusion matrix also allows to show or identify some problems like the class imbalance or also some data quality issues, okay? So let's say we have a model that tries to classify clothing into three categories, right? Let's say the shirt, the coat, and the sneakers, okay? And when we run the testing stage, we got this confusion matrix right here. So each row right here, it shows the actual true label, and each column shows what the model predicted. So the diagonal values right here, they are the correct predictions, okay? Versus all the off-diagonal values are actually errors. So for example, the model predicted shirt, okay, when it was actually a coat 8 times. Okay, this is the number of mistakes or confusions between a shirt and a coat. So while CNNs have proven effective in domains like autonomous driving and medical diagnosis, their development introduces serious ethical and technical risks, okay? So consider a medical CNN that misclassifies a malignant tumor as benign. So this isn't just a performance failure, right? It's actually a decision-making failure with human consequences, okay? Or you could also think of a surveillance system that misidentifies individuals due to some training data bias. Okay, so this reflects a lack of representational fairness. Okay, so technically, these failures often stem from things like overfitting to the training distribution and overfitting to the bias in the data set and some also problems with the interpretability, right? So CNNs can sometimes pick up on spurious correlations, okay, or latch on some background textures that humans would ignore. And because their internal feature hierarchies are not inherently explainable, we often do not know what features the model is truly using, okay? So as future computer scientists, you must always consider how can we improve model robustness and transparency? How can we build trustworthy AI models?